For those who are new, let me just give you a tiny bit of background. So this is done with MakeSpace here in Cambridge. It's called How to Design Electronics. I'm an electronics engineer. I've been doing this for nearly 30 years now. And the whole idea of these sessions, we started it during COVID at MakeSpace, was just to share a few ideas around designing electronics that may be of some use to you. The slides I've got here, everything you can download, so you don't need to take copious notes or anything like that. Got a quick slide here, hope you can see that. So what I tend to do is any slides or anything useful, if you skip along to my website and scroll down to downloads, you'll see that today's slides is number 8. This is the 8th in series 2, How to Design Electronics. There's just a few slides in there which I thought might be useful. Sometimes the worst thing that happens in this is the video signal goes wrong or my internet craps out and then I'm talking to myself for a minute. So if that happens, just bear with me whilst I try and reconnect it. It does happen. Right, so anyway, so this particular topic this evening was one that was asked of me last year, and it's all on medical devices. I can't remember who asked me to do this one. But my background is, I do have my master's degree is medical physics. I have designed quite a few medical devices in the past. I'm working on one right now. And I thought it'd be really good if we actually used the current project I'm working on as our example of medical devices. So I've done this in 2 parts for us today. A little bit on approvals and the story this week at the test sites, what's been going on with that, it's quite useful. And then just the second part, I thought I'd share with you some ideas on basically designing for fail-safe medical devices, because designing something for medical is somewhat different to just designing something hobbyist. So as I say, you're really welcome to stick your microphones on and interrupt me. I don't mind that. I'll just say that if you are going to take a phone call, just turn your microphone off, otherwise we all get to enjoy it. And we'll all ask you about it afterwards. Right, okay, I've got a little time here to help me. So first half, I should say, of our little chit chat this evening is going to be on the very thorny world of approvals. Now, the moral of the story is trust no one. As you'll find out, a couple of issues that have come up this week and last week, it's been on this project for 2 weeks for approvals. Nothing is what it seems when it comes to, well, any electronic device when you're trying to do approvals. So I think the first takeaway is CE on a product plus CE on another product. If you put them together, you don't necessarily get CE. And I'll show you exactly what will go wrong and how to walk around it. For anyone here who's doing medical devices, the standard to which everyone should adhere to, they've all got magic numbers. And for medical devices, it's called 60601-1. And they revise them every few years. Currently it's on its 4th revision. So that's the 4th edition, if anyone's doing this. And with a lot of these products, certainly medical devices, they're what's called harmonized. That is, if you do anything for the EU or the UK, it'll be pretty much the same, but not quite, as we'll discover in about 5 minutes, for, say, doing it for, say, North America, where you have to go through the FDA, Food and Drugs Administration. So there's a number of things, and same with any electronics really, but we'll focus on medical devices for now. So I've got a list here of a few things that all got to work in absolute harmony. Otherwise, it's just not going to happen. And these are very much sort of in the order that we're doing things for our testing at the moment. Radio emissions, every bit of equipment will emit radio waves. And there's a limit you've got to be below. So now I've got here in my handy book a picture for what we're looking at. Hopefully we can see this okay. Maybe I'll hold up the camera a little bit. So this, oh, crikey. Let me move the camera down for us all. There we go. And if I try and refocus that, oops. I've lost it, haven't I? Radiated emissions. There we go. Right, let me just try and refocus that. There we go. So medical devices. There we go. So with your whatever device you're talking about, we've got to be below certain levels on our equipment. There's two levels here. One's called Class A, and which is this top line, and one is called Class B, which is this bottom line. If you're doing something that's going into a clinic, for example, then it'll definitely be the top line, so you've got a little bit more leeway. If you're doing something that's going to go into somebody's home, if they're taking it away with them, then it's going to have to be at the bottom line. Don't ask me how they come up with these numbers. I guess people like Phillips with a lot of clout probably decide what's what. Just you definitely do not want to be on the wrong side of it. And so at the moment, we've done our radio emissions. So we do something called PreCompliance, which is, and this is now really paying off, you know, it's about £1,000 a day, money really well spent for any product, medical or otherwise. And the standard we're applying, I could write this down for us, since I've got it here. So this is called EN, the European norm, 55032. So there we go. So that's our first little nugget we've got to be below. Now, of course, if you're going into America, then you've got the FCC to deal with. Unfortunately, that is the same level when we're talking about radio emissions. Let's zoom that out a little bit for us again. Sweet. Refocus. Genius. So that's where things are pretty straightforward on your radio emissions. And when things suddenly start getting a bit tasty is the next part, which is radio immunity. That is, as well as your equipment radiates radio waves, and it's got to be below level, it's got to be immune to radio levels as well. And with medical devices, radio immunity is when things start to get really tasty. Because I've got an example. This is actually our test program. I've taken the company's name off this. So this is just an extract from an actual test program for a medical device. So this is just part of it. Oh, that's what the aim was. Right, okay. So as always, I'll read, I'm sure we can see this. This is actually valuable for download. You can just skip along to the website and look at that. We still look at 30 to 1 gigahertz, but because our medical equipment, because it's wearable tech, it's got Bluetooth, they've now got to go to 18 gigahertz. And then also even for FCC, of course, I think for EN, I think we go to 6 gigahertz. For the FCC, we have to go up to even higher. You know, we've even got 25 gigahertz. It is absolutely crazy the levels you've got to test these things to. So it's not just a case of buy something off the shelf and you're good to go. That is absolutely not how this works. And the other thing we've got to bear in mind here, so on the immunity side, you probably can't see this very well, but you can get it on the download, but I'll give you the juicy bits. There we go. Hopefully you can see that all okay. Right, so with something like your laptop or your mobile phone or your digital watch or your calculator or your Game Boy or your, the ZX Spectrum, BBC Micro, whatever, the levels that they have to deal with on immunity is just 3 volts per meter. It's not very much. It's pretty easy to get through that. With something like a weighing scale, for say weighing your bananas in the supermarket, it's 10 volts per meter. It's 3 times harder to pass radio immunity for a weighing scale, because you're weighing money, than what it is your computer or the screen you're watching this on. With medical devices, it gets even worse, because they have what are called spot frequencies. That might be a bit blurry. So try and refocus that for us. Looks the same to me. They do have what's called spot frequencies. So it's 10 volts per meter, I think up to a gig. And then after a gig, they do then drop to, I think it might be 3 volts per meter. But they have what are called spot frequencies, where, like it says here, 385, it's got to be able to handle 27 volts per meter, which is huge. At 450, it's got to be able to handle 28 volts per meter. I don't know how they came up with these numbers, frequencies. I guess there's bits of equipment that will output different frequencies typically. That must be what it is. But this is what you've got to comply with. And what you're looking for is that your medical device does not adversely respond to them. For example, this week I've been testing, and last week I've been testing a medical device with temperature. Everything was great until we did the spot frequencies, and at 450 megahertz, that one, suddenly the temperature started going wild. And when we came off it, it was actually a band. It was about 440 to sort of 480 we've discovered. But the standard's interested in 450. It suddenly went absolutely crackers. And you've then got to sort of stop your testing and try and work out what on earth is causing this. How can I deal with it? One way to deal with it, genius, is with the standard, the level to which your system responds as a tolerance, say plus or minus 1 degree on temperature, what that tolerance is down to you, the manufacturer. So you could say, okay, I'm going to give this a 5 degree tolerance, and then you might pass. But then the question, of course, is it sensible for this temperature to have a 5 degree tolerance? Probably not, is the answer. So so we've been plowing our way through that this week, and what we actually found was causing this problem. There was a unit which is going to be represented by, let's say, this computer mouse. Here it is. We had a computer, a board about the size of that, and it had a Flexi Track on the end of it, which is represented. There we go. Which is represented by this bookmark. So this our board, say represented by this mouse, that was great for, had a 4-layer board, brilliant. The problem was this Flexi Track had no ground in it. So it was just tracks, and the tracks were actually causing the ground voltage to drop, which then caused the temperature signal to drop, and it looked like we had a really screwed up reading. How did I fix it to EMC for this? I've got some here, very handy. I've got some copper tape. I put some tape on it, connected it to ground, so the Flexi Track had a proper ground. And back in the chamber, 450 megahertz, absolutely fine. So getting the design right, it might work perfectly for, say, your laptop, and you think brilliant, but the fact is, when you go to medical, it's a whole new ball game. So that's one part. The other part that we've had fun with, of course, has been with the bought-in power supply. Now then, so we've actually taken this power supply apart. So this is what's left of it. So power supplies, this is a case of CE does not equal CE. I've actually got a zoomed in picture so you can see what happened to it. Hopefully you can see that, everybody. So power supplies have to be tested to 2000 volt surge, and they do 500, 1000, 2000 volt surge. It's got to be able to handle the surges for 10 cycles, and it must be absolutely okay. This thing, an enormous loud bang and a very funny smell. If you remember when we were kids, you had cap guns. And remember how they smelt, those cap guns? That's what this smelt like. So in this design here, I'll draw on here what the circuit is. And this is a case of trust nobody when it comes to this stuff. So if I do it that way for us. Live, neutral. Yep, they've got a fuse, which is this thing here. So I'm pleased to say there was a fuse. Then they had, because we reverse engineered it, this green thing here, hopefully you can see that. That's just a common mode choke. That's there for EMC purposes, just to try and stop a lot of nasty radio waves getting out onto the mains. Conducted emissions is something of its significance. Then they had a bridge rectifier, like so. And then after that, they went straight into a capacitor that was rated for 400 volts. So the thing is, 500 volt surge, 1000 volt surge, and a 2000 volt surge. Whoops. This poor thing had absolutely no chance of surviving. And I've got it in the picture, so hopefully you can see what happened to it under testing this week. I'm not sure everybody can see that, but there we go. So the capacitor did its thing. So you can see these crosshairs on the electrolytics. They're designed that if they do burst and outgas, it's a controlled explosion. Many years ago, they weren't anything like that. In fact, there's one on here. Can you believe it? They've got one here which will outgas safely. And then they've got one here which won't outgas safely. This thing will probably just go cataclysmic, I suspect. But anyway, if we look through the paperwork for this device that's nailed onto the end of our medical product, you'd think life is great. You know, I've got a product here, it complies with all the standards. I'll just put it in and we're off. And it blew up. What seems to be missing to me in this circuit, and here's a word to the wise, is some sort of surge arrestor to stop that happening. And the normal place to put a surge arrestor is usually on the inputs. This doesn't have a earth. This is what's called double insulated. So it's just the earth is usually just plastic. You've probably all seen those. So there should be some sort of protection here. So whether you're designing medical or non-medical, if it's nailed onto the mains, you really do need to have some sort of protection on your board. So that was missing in our view. The manufacturer claims that everything is sweet and they've sold these for 5 years and nobody else has complained. I thought, well, we've tested it, it blew up, we're complaining. I haven't yet had an answer to how did they test this thing to 500, 1000 and 2000 volt surge and it not blow up. So I think the moral of the story is trust nobody. And it is a fact that whatever you're developing, just because you've got yourself a CE rated or UL rated or TUV or whatever else, just because you've got a component which is rated for the product you're making, it does not give you I don't know, impunity, the right to just go and say, well, that one's rated, therefore I can get another one that's rated. You just can't do that because all these issues add up. And certainly with power supplies, what tends to happen is the manufacturer will test it for what is their most favorable condition. And that'll probably be the maximum load. And when you have the maximum load on a switch mode power supply, it has its best efficiency. And when it has its best efficiency, it has its lowest radio emissions. As soon as you drop off that peak load current, the efficiency drops. And when the efficiency drops on a power supply, you generally find the emissions will go up. So whatever you buy, you've still got to test it with whatever the end application is. So that's probably why when you buy a mobile phone, you get a charger with it. If you didn't get a charger with it, it wouldn't exactly be a system anymore. So it would be a bit useless as a product. Anyway, enough of my ranting. So yeah, that blew up. Talking of going back to radio emissions, the product I've developed over the last year with this company, I'm pleased to say, I haven't got the results here, but the radio emissions are pretty much background noise. It really is a thing of beauty. What ruins it is, and I've got the guts of it here, is the wireless charger. So this is something which has come in from China. It's a 2-layer PCB. You'd think there's not a lot on this. So they have the 5 volts coming to where I'm pointing here, comes in here from our slightly zapped charger. So the mains comes in here on this red and black. Comes across to here. I could draw it on actually, couldn't I? There we go, 5 volts. And then this is magnetically coupled for wireless charging. So this tiny board here has absolutely ruined a lot of my EMC work. So one bought in piece of junk, let's call it what it is, has caused my radio emissions to actually be over the limit. So mine are really low, and this thing is really, really high. And this actually takes the emissions right up to the limit. So we've had to put a split choke. You've seen those things on USB cables, those blobs. We've had to put one of those on, and it's only just saved the day. And it's only just saved the day with this power supply. So if I swap this power supply, and that's got its own emissions, even though they both might have the correct stickers on them, it might push my radio emissions over the edge. So you know what, it's not all peaches and cream with this sort of stuff. The other thing with medical devices, certainly if you're going into North America, is something called AIM. AIM. It took us a bit of a while to find out what on earth this stood for, but it's actually the Association for Automatic Identification and Mobility. The FCC is pretty much the American, Part 15 is the American radio emissions standard. If you try to sell anything in America medical, you've got to go through the FDA, of course, Food and Drugs Administration. And they will always ask you for an AIM report, AIM. Now, AIM is slightly worse than what we had before. If you remember all our spot frequencies, wherever they've gone, all our crazy spot frequencies of 385 and 450 at 28 volts per meter. Bearing in mind a PC 3 volts per meter. AIM calls the spot frequencies absolutely crazy. We've got 54 volts per meter between 860 and 960 megahertz, the 2.4 gigahertz, which is Bluetooth. They call for an immunity to 54 volts per meter. So as you see, you can't just get something off the shelf and think, brilliant, let's go flog it. It's just not a thing. The other thing which they look at, whereas usually we're looking at radio waves, the other thing they look at, and this is called AIM, is they look at electric fields. So just by way of example, with a, what do I call it? With radio waves, they have what basically looks like the aerial on the top of your house for TV. Yep, looks like that. With under AIM, they also look at electric fields, so they actually have a loop antenna, and they're looking at electric fields and how that interferes. So AIM is pretty tough. I am told by the people at the EMC test site that they have never seen an issue under the electric fields, which is this funny loop thing. They've never seen any issues with that, but they've certainly seen plenty of issues with the radio waves. Yeah, and sure enough, we had our fair share this week. So hopefully we're going to get back in there on Friday and see if this idea of putting a proper ground plane on the Flexi Track saves the day. So, yeah.
Could you possibly go into? I'm sorry. I am suspicioning that you know far more about the implications of whether it's 3 volts per meter or 30.
Yeah.
Could you perhaps explain how that works and what the implications of that change
Yeah,
are?
certainly are. Good question. Thank you, Ruth. Right. So something like 1 volt per meter is nothing. That's nothing will happen to 1 volt per meter. All electrical equipment, you know, I'm looking around my desk here. I've got my mobile phone, my oscilloscope, my PC screen. That's all 3 volts per meter. So what you're looking for, and it's up to you, the designer, and the company to decide what is considered to be acceptable for that level of immunity. So, for example, if I was to fire 3 volts per meter at my mobile phone and the mobile phone suddenly started, playing Radio 3, okay, I no listens to that anyway. So, but that might be considered to be slightly unacceptable, that it has an adverse effect at 3 volts per meter. So, but what you're looking for is the more radio waves they pump into it and the stronger it is, the less of an effect that you're allowed to have.
So is this, I mean, let's say you expose some bit of electronics to say 10 volts per meter.
Yeah.
So if you had a, 2 plate electrodes, one grounded and one at 10 volts, and they were a meter apart, I presume that's a 10 volt per meter field.
Yeah.
And then you stick your electronic somewhere in the middle and it doesn't blow up.
Yeah.
Have I just passed? Or has this
well, the criteria for passing is actually down to you, the manufacturer. So
but no, it's not the passing, it's is the field a varying field, or is it a fixed, like?
Oh,
static?
okay, right. So the field runs from right. So the field runs from, well, say a PC. The field runs from 80 megahertz all the way up to 1 gigahertz at a level.
Right.
So it is the whole range. If you've got Bluetooth on your device, then you've got to go up to 6 gigahertz. You've got to go even higher,
right?
Because you've got a Bluetooth, you've got a radio module in there.
Okay.
Although when you get to the Bluetooth of the 2.4 gigahertz, they'll actually step around that. They won't do that bit because it'd be a bit unreasonable to blast it with the same signal that you're trying to do communications with.
Right.
So that would be considered a tiny bit unreasonable. So they go around the Bluetooth.
So you've got a sine wave frequency at a given amplitude
Yeah,
that you're inflicting on your electronics.
pretty much. Yeah, it's exactly how it works. Yeah. Yeah, and you need to go to test it. In fact, when we do, I think the next session might be on debugging. Yeah, it is debugging next well, a couple of weeks' time. I've actually got some homebrew equipment that we'll play with and have a look at some of those sort of things. Yeah, because as part of
I'll shut up now.
no, it's good. I love the interruptions. Otherwise, I'll just rabbit on, and sometimes I find about a minute later I've been talking to myself because I've dropped off the call. So no, I'm all for questions. So anyone's free to stick your microphone on and just ask anything. I might know the answer. I might not. Where was I at? Yeah. So so we've been doing something called AIM. AIM. Yes, the AIM stands for the Association for Automatic Identification and Mobility. I know that's 2 A's, isn't it? But there we go. I didn't name it. That's just what it's called. And it took a while to find out what it was called as well. That seemed to be a well-kept secret. It took a bit of digging. So yeah, radio immunity for medical devices, it's a very tough cookie. It's not easy to do, and I think the design. I think we just had to do 2 spins of this board, and the only reason we had to do 2 spins really was one to tidy up all the tracking. So all the tracks are nice and straight, without too many kinks in. If you're doing auto route, it's very easy to end up with kinks in your design. So I got rid of all the kinks. Everything's nice and compact. And yeah, it was a thing of beauty. In fact, interesting point of note for you all. What's interesting is as they go to higher and higher frequencies, it's becoming quite common now because the electronics are getting smaller and smaller, more and more compact. Certainly battery operated products are getting smaller and smaller. They're becoming more and more susceptible to the much higher frequencies because the much higher frequencies, of course, got a much smaller wavelength. And the smaller the boards are getting, you're starting to approach the wavelengths of some of those very high frequencies. So word of warning is battery operated products can cause you quite a problem at the very high frequencies. And trying to solve a problem at a very high frequency is certainly easier said than done. Right, what else have I got here? So I was going to move on and share with you. That's a bit about approvals. As I said before, I think the moral of the story is trust nobody. As I say, CE, and I've got a brilliant paper off on it. I'm going to upload it to my website. It's called CE plus CE does not equal CE. And it's absolutely true. And of course, people make mistakes. People lie. People make stuff up. People put stuff out there for a similar product. I've certainly seen that in the past of, well, we gave you the results for a similar product. Right, 8 o'clock. I tell you what, I've got something else for us here. I've just got 2 parts for us today. The other part I was going to share with you was some design ideas that I've used in the past for fail-safe. So I'm going to draw these because I didn't have time to print anything off because I've been at EMC for 2 weeks. So we'll draw these as we go along. And these are some of the things which I've done in the past. And here's the first one. So some time ago, this was an oscillator, OSC. Right, and I'm going to have a capacitor and a resistor. Okay, there we go. So this is just an RC network. Yep, nothing fancy. And let's say F is somehow inversely proportional to R and C. Okay, hopefully you're with me so far. So if the capacitance goes up or down, obviously it will affect the frequency. And similarly, if the resistor goes up or down, it'll affect, say, this oscillator frequency. And so in your medical device, you've got to think, right, how on earth am I going to be able to handle? If something goes wrong, how will I handle it? And this is the risk analysis in the design, where you're looking for what could go wrong, what are the consequences of it going wrong, what can I do to mitigate those circumstances, and what is the residual effect of that then going wrong with some mitigating trickery, and is it then going to be safe? And of course, you want to make sure, of course, that at the end, yes, it is going to be safe. So you don't write anything down that's not going to lead the witness to a safe day. Because if it's not going to be safe, then you've clearly got to do something about it. So in medical devices, and medical device I worked on at least 10 years ago, we had an RC circuit in there for some timing. And of course, the issue is with capacitors, you've got to think, how does it fail? So capacitors generally fail, like this one here, wherever it's gone. Yeah, this capacitor has failed without gas. It's failed as a short circuit. So if I had a short circuit, is that then going to say, you know, I've then got a wire, pretty much. Is that then going to cause me a problem with my medical device? That's the question. So the product I was working on was actually a low power diathermy for taking out thread veins. It was cosmetic surgery. So the way I got around this being safe, and it's painfully simple, was I just added another capacitor into the circuit. Yep. So if it did short circuit and fail, then at least you'd still have some time and you'd still have some therapeutic effect. It wouldn't be ideal, it wouldn't be optimum, but it would still do its job and it would still be safe. You wouldn't end up causing the patient harm, which is really critical. Obviously, that capacitors in series, you'd end up possibly, you know, if they were exactly the same, keep them as simple, 10 microfarads, say 10 microfarads. Obviously, in series, that would become 5 microfarads because they're in series. With resistors, of course, resistors tend to fail open circuit. So the easy way to deal with that is just to put one in parallel with it. So if it fails open circuit, then of course you've then still got your circuit working. We did put some sensing electronics into that, but we just had to think about, you know, how can we keep it safe? If it fails, how is it failing? And then the limits on that, which I was talking about with Ruth just a moment ago, you know, it was decided with the clinician that, yeah, okay, that wouldn't be great, but it wouldn't kill the patient. The product would still work, just wouldn't be ideal, but it would be within tolerance, and that tolerance is specified by the customer. So that's pretty straightforward and easy. One of the other things which you've got to think about, on the back, safe paper, is if the cable comes out, if you've got cables, what's going to happen? You know, if you've got, say, some cables, yep, so we've got 2 devices here. If the cable comes apart, oh, there we go. If the cable comes apart, what's going to happen? Is it going to have a bad effect? And so, well, okay, the easy way to deal with that is, you know, we'll just put some pull-up resistors or pull down or some pull-up, or whatever floats your boat. Just so that there is a known result. A bit like if you're designing a digital circuit, of course, you always make sure you handle every single possible input. You don't just do, you know, if you had 2 inputs, that'd be 4 conditions. You wouldn't define just 2, you make sure you define everything. And this would be like your risk analysis. Look, if the cable falls out, it's not great, but it'll work out the cable's fallen out. It'll turn itself off, and it will be safe. So yeah, so you've got to think about cables, you've got to think about components failing and how they fail. slip of water. And the other one saying this is that same medical product, and this is a word otherwise. Right, remember CE plus CE does not equal CE. Huh? So this medical product, let's draw it here. So let's come into the page. There we go, so you can see it all. It had an LCD, okay, which of course went to some Windows processor. Yeah, let's call it. Then of course it went to the magic box of tricks, yeah, that we were designing, question mark, medical device there. And of course this whole thing is of course then powered by a power supply. Yep, so in comes the mains. So what have we got here? We've got our power supply, bit of a nightmare, designed by somebody who claims they've done all the approvals. We've got a embedded processor here, designed by another company. This is true, this happened. Another company, and onto that product they've nailed a screen from a third company, and then there's a fourth company that's done the operating system. And then, of course, the company I was doing the work with obviously wrote their app to sit on it. So there's so many different companies involved in this sort of development. Some of them claim they've done stuff, some of them claim they haven't. And so you've got to test it as a system. But what we were looking at was, well, we've got no control over this part here, and yet we're connecting our medical device to it. So how can we somehow not be reliant on any issues that they might throw at us, because obviously we're not buying enough of them to even talk to us. So the way we solved this issue, and we've talked about this in one of our previous sessions, I know, is the link between the two, believe it or not, we got round it just by using some opto isolators as our bridge. It sounds really simple, but trust me, it worked. This was our bridge between the bought-in parts and our parts. So from an electrical safety perspective, IEC 60601, we didn't actually have to worry ourselves in any way about any of the electrical safety approved considerations that might affect our end from a medical perspective. It was all pretty a very simple solution, because if you've got software in something as well, a lot of people overlook this. If you've got software in it as well, the software is often also a component of the system that is going to be assessed. So a really neat and simple way to deal with software, where the software might change, or if you've got a bought-in PC like a Raspberry Pi or something, where you've got no control over the processor part, is we designed the electronics such that if the software had a hickey fit and tried to do something really crazy to the patient, the electronics would spot that crazy moment and make it safe. And of course, that's all then part of the risk analysis, isn't it? So there's just a few ideas of approvals and designing to be fail-safe. The last one I should point out on here is what are called critical components. That is to say, if you've got any component in a system where you might want to change other bits in and out, so that, say, critical, a fuse, for example, is a critical component. I mean, on this bad boy here, the critical components are clearly the fuse. There it is. I would say this common mode choke is probably critical. Probably say this capacitor here that blew up, they're probably critical. So you want to have in the design of your arsenal, certainly under the current world climate where you can't buy anything, a number of components that you can just drop in and replace. But those drop-in replaces have to be built into the approvals file at the point of design. Thinking that, oh, great, we've run out of components, right, we'll just swap that processor for another one and life will be good. It so doesn't work like that, because if you think about it, changing a processor is a material change to a design. If I change the capacitor and it's got a different voltage rating, that's a material change to the design. I would say probably on this power supply here, I mean, these chokes are probably going to be a nightmare, because this will be one-off. That'll be a nightmare to get hold of. So in the materials in this, the tape on here, the tape on the outside, this yellow tape, that's a critical component. The insulation on the windings, that's a critical component. Believe it or not, the PCB it's on, this is usually what's called FR4. That's a critical component. So anything you think, oh, geez, I might want to spot that at some point. Yeah, you've got to think about it really early, and you might have to do some additional testing. Right, what's the time? 8:15. That's not too bad, is it? Anyone got any questions, comments, thoughts? You need to put your microphones on.
It occurs to me, you were talking earlier about what happens if a plug-in socket part company.
Yeah.
And
sounds simple, doesn't it?
I was wondering, do you have to account for a partial unplug? So some wires are unplugged and some aren't.
Well, this would be part of what's your risk analysis, where you would have to have a look at, you know, what is the fault? Cable falling off, or part falling off, as you say. What's the effect of that? Is it going to cause a problem? I mean, let's say, for example, yeah, let's say the diathermy product I worked on many years ago. You know, the power for the diathermy was all digitally controlled. So yeah, what if the cable half fell out? It would probably get a rather sorry looking signal. So yeah, so well, the way we dealt with that if it got something that looked like a sorry signal, that was going to cause a dangerous situation. You've got to design the electronics such that it can handle that and make it safe. Now, of course, you could do that in software. You know, you could have it going into another, say, a small processor, do it in software. But the challenge with doing it all in software is your software then gets assessed. And then how do you then update any software without having to go back through the approvals process? So it's quite a nightmare. So you've got to be careful on exactly what is it that you're going to try and protect, and how are you going to do it.
Yeah,
it's not trivial, is it? It never is.
Never is.
Never is. I'm just trying to use my mouse here with absolutely zero success. Right, oh, my mouse isn't working. Well, that would be why, won't it? All right, hang on a sec. What have we got here in the chat? I've got something here for us. Tricky bits. Yeah, oh, right, okay. Igor, is it Igor? He says, from our experience, the tricky bits are spurious emissions and overlapping radio and medical directives. Yeah, RED, and the impact design and manufacturing on both electronics and overall design. Yeah, spurious signals, emissions. Yeah, they are awkward buggers, shall we say. You'll find out where things are coming from. I mean, I'm pleased to say in the design which I'm doing at the moment, medical device, the emissions have actually been really low. They've been pretty well background noise. However, for us, it's been the radio immunity, which has been the absolute nightmare. How the hell do we solve the immunity problem? So how did we do it? Yeah.
Just to add to this point, since I made this comment, but the spurious emissions is more to the point of what you were saying, that trust no one. So we had a particular issue with we're using an MCU. The MCU has an errata from the manufacturer on particular kind of aspect, and the recommended kind of workaround fix to it. And all of that is basically published and no one's complaining about anything. Then you go through the immunity test and suddenly you find that under a particular frequency, your device is starting to emit and it's not supposed to. So as we found out later was due to the fact that there was something with this MCU which was related in the errata, but the fix which the manufacturers suggested was causing this other issue. So we had to then implement another workaround. And the key is that you won't find this problem until you go through this testing. You won't find it until you have the whole sort of design implemented and preferably done through the pre-production run and so on. So anyway, that's just why the spurious emission. So it wasn't anything to do with the design from our side. We could have not predicted it. We could have not addressed it in advance. But once we've discovered this problem, then lo and behold, there are other people on the internet complaining about the same thing. But that's where kind of every manufacturer of components, effectively they state that they don't really support your medical device testing because you're testing the system and they're a provider of a component of the system. So it's to your point that it's all down to your responsibility and your risk assessment.
That's absolutely true. Very eloquently put. Yeah, it is without doubt the legal responsibility actually is on you, the manufacturer, that the people who are selling the components, they'll just go, yeah, what we like, eh? Someone else will buy it next week. And yeah, you'll be lucky if you hear from them again. Yeah, we've asked these people, how did you pass your 2 kilovolt testing when we can't see any protection? This is the actual board here. As you can see here, look, red and black, that's the mains coming in. It goes to a fuse. Then it goes through this common mode choke for noise. So that's about the only good thing about it. Then it goes through this black block here, which is the full bridge rectifier. And then we've got a 400 volt capacitor. I know it's 400 because it says on it 400 volts. So it's quite easy to work that one out. Where is the protection in this for 2 or 500? It blew up. And yet they claim that they've done the testing, you know, they've got all the pay, won't say who it is, but they claim, you know, and you look at the documentation and you think, well, geez, they've done everything, you know, they've gone to UL, they've gone to ETL, and they've gone to China CCC, and they've gone for, you know, TUV and CB scheme, you know, and the paper trail looks very long and impressive. And yet the standard, that which is 61000 for power supplies, the standard demands 2 kilovolt surge tests. So how does this circuit with no protection apart from a fuse survive 2 kilovolt surge tests? Well, it didn't, it blew up, obviously. And if you're thinking, well, I've got a fuse on it, therefore it's safe. Unfortunately, under the standard, that doesn't actually apply. It has to survive the surge. And of course, the other thing as well, I'm sure Aga's found this as well, is what one company's interpretation can be different to another's. So for example, under a surge test, you're allowed to flinch and then say auto recover. You know, if you were say just do charging, say wireless charger, that would probably be acceptable. If it was connected to a life support, I would probably suggest that's not acceptable. So, it depends on what the criteria is as well. So you can't just go and get something off the shelf that says, right, all right, CE, therefore I'm good, and try and put all your CE things together and think jobs are good. And it just does not work like that, as we have discovered this week. Yeah, trust no one, eh? I think that's the moral of the story. You got to dig deep. And usually I find
is the solution, Stephen, to your power supply woe that you build your own power supply, or do you just want to? Are you just going to find somebody else's that's better?
Yeah. Well, this comes down to one of my other favorite subjects. Whether it's medical or anything else, is pre-compliance. And that's because going through the full approvals process, as we're doing at the moment, a medical product, depending on what it is, because you have to create a test program with the test house, but you need someone who knows their onions a little bit and can steer it. So you need someone on site to help steer it. And I would say that for a fact. I was going with this. I'll come back to me. This happens as you get old. What's the question, Ruth?
An obvious reaction to finding out this bought-in power supply didn't work right.
Oh, design your own. That's your question.
Design your own.
Well, that's one way. Or, mentioned about pre-compliance is you take a number of them. You get a few that, okay, I recognize manufacturer, someone like Siemens, for example, you just know they've done the job properly. Meanwhile, they've done the job properly. If you start getting some obscure name and they've written something bizarre on it that nobody writes, we won't say who this is, but they've written on it very strange things like conforms to. What do you mean conforms to? Nobody writes that. Nobody writes conforms to ul.std, std meaning standard. I'm in power supply, say 62368 is a standard, for example. You start looking at the terminology that they use, you think nobody writes that. So there's all sorts of alarm bells that go off. So I would, in all honesty, really, the answer to the question really is pre-compliance. You get a number of them together, a number of different power supplies that look like they stack up on paper. You get your application, whatever it may be, and you take it off to the test site and just test a load of them and work out which ones meet the criteria of not only the standard for safety, but meet the criteria for your application. Yeah, so that's how I would do it. Designing it your own one, well, that can get very expensive. There's nothing wrong with leaning on approvals when that's what they're there for. But you've got to, as I just found out, you've got to do a heck of a lot of due diligence to make sure that what you've received is actually true. And somebody's not just trying to pull a fast one. And there's a lot of fast ones being pulled out there. I wish that when we came out of Brexit, I wish the government had taken the opportunity to tighten this all up. But no, if that didn't happen, it's just business as usual. Okay, maybe had to be business as usual. But, from any product approvals, medical or anything else, it was an opportunity, in my view, that was missed. Probably nobody knew what they were doing, probably.
To be fair, if I can chip in a bit more, but it's a little bit unrealistic to expect a startup, assuming it's a startup designing a new product and so on, to just then sort of pull off the market a number of different critical components and then do testing with all of them. From my experience, I would recommend the choice of a reasonably well-established manufacturing partner. If you have a manufacturing partner who has been around for some time and so on, then you bring them the specification for what you need from your engineers, and they will be able to recommend from their procurement and so on. Well, these are the components which we've worked with. These are the components which passed maybe certification in other products. Now, that does not guarantee that it will pass in yours, but it's definitely increasing your chances. So working with a contract electronic manufacturer, whether it's in China, whether it's in Europe or in the UK, someone who's established and they know their supply chain, that's the whole thing. Because then they will bring you the components which have a better chance of working for your application. And even then you still have some other issues, but at least you have a better chance to start with. That's at least would be my sort of recommendation on that particular point. You wouldn't design your own, you just get advice on sourcing the right component.
Yeah. I mean, it means that there are plenty of good standards out there and companies who do comply. You get what you pay for. You know, if you pay for £3 for a power supply, you know, and it's cost them, you know, £50,000 to get it through the approvals process, a lot of heartache. What do you think the probability is that they've actually done the work properly if they're selling to you for £3? I would suggest very little. You know, so the price should be an alarm bell to start with. But yeah, you've got to do your homework, and as we're saying, trust nobody. So I think that's the moral of the story. You know. Yeah, I had one other thing here. Oh yes, William asks. Yeah, so William says, to pass surge test, how much surge current do you need to design for? I think the surge is actually based on voltage, not current. And for a standard power supply, William, the answer is they're tested to 500 volt surge, plus or minus 500, I should say. Can't remember how long the burst is. It's a short burst, and they repeat that plus or minus 5 times each, so it's 10 times in total. 1,000 volts, and then 2,000 volts. So if you're buying a power supply, for example, and they gave you the approvals, I'll be looking to make sure that they're in there. I hope that answers the question for you, William. Don't you need to know the current to get the rating of the suppression diode? Okay, I'm back on Friday at EMC, so I will ask that to double check. I'll have an answer next time, but the surge testing that we've done has been on voltage rather than any current setting. But you know, I may be wrong. I don't know all the answers, I'm afraid. And your mic isn't working. Okay, right. Well, I will try and remember on Friday to see if I can have an answer for you for next time. Which it's coming up to that time when we put the kettle on. So just before I let you all go. So next time, it's only in 2 weeks. I postponed this one by 2 weeks because I was out, I'm afraid. It's the Wednesday the 1st. And it's going to be on debugging. So just to whet your appetites, these arrived for me on Monday. Whilst I was at the EMC test site, I was having a chat about what sort of like pre-compliance, you know, Homer setups. And they put me onto these things. Here we go. So what on earth are these? Ruth, any idea? What do I do with these? We're going to play with these next time, but I thought I'd give you a little whet your appetite.
We're talking about debugging.
Yeah. There's a little bit more to this piece of kit.
I'm going to go for grommet something.
Okay, you nearly right, except you're completely wrong. So these are actually search codes. We're going to play with these next time. I've actually got a proper analyzer, but you can buy some cheap analyzers off Amazon. I'll have a look them up. And so next time, we're going to look at debugging. So we'll have a little bit we'll cover a little bit actually on debugging radio problems, since it's been quite topical today. And some of the other things that I put into circuits to make my life easy for debugging. So yeah, these are only
can I just add the number one thing that I have in the last month or so discovered is give yourself a nice big fat ground pin And as in a real actual pin that you can attach your probes to and whatnot.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I always had a ground pin, you know, for oscilloscope leads and so forth. Yeah, it's really annoying, isn't it, when you've got to solder a wire on, you know, so you can clip your oscilloscope ground on. Yeah, I always put one on my boards. Anyway, look, it's 8:30, everybody. It's that time when we should be putting the kettle on, and I'm going to go do the same. So
I have a question for the assembled throng.
Yeah.
Which is at MakeSpace, is there one of those spot welder things that's used to make up NiCad battery? No, not NiCad, lithium ion battery sets. So it's like a mini spot welder.
I don't know. Are we allowed? Are we allowed to have such things at MakeSpace?
I know. A little while back, the thought was raised as to whether one could be attained, but I didn't hear any more.
Oh, right. Okay.
And at the moment, I have a need for making myself a battery pack because nobody seems to sell what I want.
Yeah, that happens a lot. Yeah, you never buy what you want.
Anyway, okay.
Right. Okay. I don't know the answer. Yeah, you'll have to have Badger Ward on the call next time he's in. All right, everybody. I will see you all on the Wednesday, the 1st of June. And say it'll be all on debugging. So we'll have some, we're going to have some kit out and look at some crazy stuff set with these as well. So these are going to be really useful for debugging. Alrighty, okay, should we close there and go put the kettle on, everybody? I think that's always a good idea.
Take care.
Mouse isn't working. Don't know what's wrong with it.
Dead battery.
Dead battery. Yeah, too right. There we go. Okay, everybody. Thank you for joining, and I look forward to seeing you all next time.